Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch. Ben, welcome back to you, mate. It's normally a week between drinks for you and I, but mate, it's been a good 10, 15 minutes, hasn't it?
It's been a good 10 or 15 minutes, right? Look, the reality is there's a lot of information we need to get through to help our property friends, both landlords and tenants, in terms of educating them around the different states and territories and what's happening. And we've just got A-grade talent to come on and share that information. So I'm delighted that we're pushing out a couple of episodes back to back.
We are, Ben. And when you and I set this podcast up in the early days, we specifically made sure there was extra seats on the couch to get the very best people onto the podcast. And today has been no exception with our back-to-back episodes, so I'm super excited. Earlier this week, I was asked to join the Conversation Hour on the ABC on Tuesday, and I happened to be doing that with our guest today, Leah, Calnan, who's the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. So it was. I reached out to her and said, "Hey, listen, you had some really great messages to share. So are you interested in coming onto the Property Couch?" And she was a terrific sport, Ben. Said yes straight away. And so we're actually going to be interviewing Leah shortly and getting some insights from the Victorian perspective. But before we do that, Ben, I'm going to talk about our Mindset Minute theme today, which is from the director of The Last Jedi. And it says this: slow down and think. Panic doesn't solve problems, Ben. It just creates new ones, right? So I think about that. And Dave Ramsey says the only people who get injured on a roller coaster are those who try to get off halfway through the ride. And so if you think about someone who might have used panic to try and solve a problem where the stock market has crashed, Ben, which it has dropped to some significant lows, can you imagine the pain of knowing that not only did you crystallise that loss by selling, you're now seeing that the market has returned from its bottom by about 25%. So I'm going to say that again: slow down and think, because panic doesn't solve problems, it just creates new ones. So I just want to plant the seed to our community and think about that, Ben, because we are going through a situation where there's so much. I mean, there's just like nightly specials around this pandemic. So you're going to get lots of information. You're reading lots of headlines that often contradict. So slow down and think. Panic doesn't solve problems, Ben. It just creates new ones. Hey, super excited about today's guest, Ben. She brings a wealth of experience to the discussion. Recently took over as the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria in October of 2019. Let's cut to the interview that we recently had with Leah Calnan. All right, Ben, today we've got a very special guest. We've got Leah Calnan, who is the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria. Leah, welcome to the Property Couch.
Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. You and I were on ABC Radio earlier this week sharing our views, taking some caller feedback, text messages. So it was interesting to get a better understanding of your role from the perspective of REIV. But you've recently taken on the role as the president. I think it was October of 2019, so about 7 months ago.
Yeah.
To help our audience, before we sort of get into the main issues of real estate in Victoria, to help our audience get a better understanding of who you are, can you give us a little background on how you came into the property industry, where the initial passion for property was ignited that sort of led you to now be the president of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria?
Yeah, no problem. So I've certainly been around for a long time with regards to real estate and property management and property investing. So I bought my first property at about 21. And went through all of the challenges of working multiple jobs in order to be able to manage my mortgage. Started my career in real estate in property management, and when I look back, I think it's about 25 years ago now. I remember people saying, "Oh, you got to move into sales. You're going to move into sales," and I just never had that desire or want to move into sales. I love property. There's something about it. You can see it, you can feel it. I had a journalist say to me yesterday, you can smell it, and it's true. You actually can. So I started in the industry as an assistant property manager and worked my way up to now owning my own business. So I have a business called Metro Property Management in Melbourne. We have about 2,200 properties across all of Melbourne, so about 265 suburbs I think we manage properties in. So it's a very different business model because we are 99% property management and 1% sales. My sales team are the first to tell me I give them no love. So I'm the opposite real estate director in comparison to most. They're very focused on the sales, and PM often gets less interest and less love. I do lots of trading, heavily involved with the RTA, so the Residential Tenancy Act changes that are coming in, and working with government on that. I've written a book on property management, so live, breathe, property management all the way. And then there's an opportunity board positions became available at the REIV, and I thought I would, put my hand up and see what it was like. Certainly a very quick learning curve for me. I think at that time I was the only female and only one in PM, so it was certainly a different ride back then. And then over the last few years, I've moved on through the senior vice president last year, and then took on the president in October last year. I do feel like I've crossed quite a few black cats in the last year or so to have my term as president with everything that we've got going on. Not only have we got COVID-19, I've tried to have 2 changes of constitution. We've got the RTA changes coming up in a few months.
Leah, I couldn't be happier that the president of the REIV is actually a property manager, or PM as we call them, because you are absolutely right. We were fortunate enough to interview the CEO of the REIQ earlier, and that is in terms of having someone like you who, 1, is a subject matter expert, 2, knows the industry so intimately and is a practicing professional in the industry, and then thirdly, someone in what is definitely the most turbulence, not the right word, but theatre of change that's going on in regards to tenancy reform, and I'm sure we're going to talk further about that into the year that comes, because today is more around COVID and what's happening out in the marketplace today. But so we're thankful that we have a leader like you who's in that seat, who can advocate for some of the positives that are going to come out of these reforms, but also calling out what is technically bad policy in other areas that we know that we can potentially get some reform on. So I'm really pleased that you've got the seat, and it's not a selling agent, to be honest with you.
Thanks, man.
What are some of those?
I'll ring you the next time things go crazy.
Yeah. What are some of those black cats that you've had to navigate for the purpose of our listeners, and which one do you want to tackle first?
So look, well, definitely one of the biggest changes that we had from the REIV is trying to change constitution. It's outdated. To be a formal, an official member of the REIV, you can only be an agent's representative or a licensed estate agent. That we introduced an affiliate membership a few years ago, but they have very little rights. They don't get to vote. And you think about affiliates, they're owners, corporation managers, they're valuers, they all are part of our industry. So that's been a really big challenge, and I've absolutely battled older generation in not wanting to change. They effectively don't want to see, the things that were proposed were reducing the board size to make it a little bit more agile, extending the board terms. So currently it's 3 years. We wanted to make it 4 years. Trying to create some continuity with the executive role of the board. So when you think about that, it goes vice president, senior vice president. I spent 6 months organising my business to be able to take on the role. but I still had to be voted in by the board. So just changes like that need to happen, and they still need to happen, but they probably won't happen in my term.
What about the real estate industry in general, and in particular, given that we've got a very strong property investor audience that listen to us, do you think that in terms of comparison to other states, how well do you think Victoria is placed as a real estate agent process for property investors to be investing in Victoria versus some of the other states?
Look, Victoria, prior to COVID-19, we saw the end of 2019 and the start of 2020. It was a really strong market. For weeks in February, we were getting 80% clearance rates with our auction results. And to see that was really, not just surprising, but it came on really, really quickly. So it was really positive to see that come through from the January market, where most agents tend to not come back until late January, and then we don't see high level of transactions until late February. We saw them happening around middle of February, which was certainly suggesting and showing the signs of that the Victorian market is very strong. And it has been. We're still getting 120,000 people move into the state every year. We've got low vacancy rates, and we're still reasonably affordable depending where you look. There's still lots of opportunities, and I think we've seen that lifestyle has really driven Victoria's property market. I'm fortunate that whilst my office is in Surrey Hills, I live in Pearcedale. We're on 7.5 acres, and I can still commute to the office in 45 minutes. So for those listeners, that's along the Mornington Peninsula way. So lifestyle has definitely driven the property market over the last, I'd say, 2 years, particularly in Victoria. And we're showing signs that we will outgrow Sydney in the next 5 years.
Yeah, well, you talked about the 120,000 as a number. The country gets 220,000, so 120 of them come to Victoria. So clearly it's a destination for folks overseas, and that's going to put additional pressure on housing, post-COVID. It's going to put additional pressure on housing, because that amount of people that want to come here, they'll be highly aspirational. They'll actually want to prove that the decision to come here was right, and they want home ownership. So we have a view that Victoria is a very good long-term proposition for property investors. But it's interesting to see that from your perspective in terms of the body that you represent, real estate professionals, but in terms of some of the changes that have been either mooted or proposed, it'd be interesting to see what your view are in terms from the lens of property investors, whether they're advantageous, neutral, or disadvantageous to property investors.
Look, with everything going on with COVID-19, I have to say that the industry's moved really well, and generally it's an older business. It's very traditional. Agents don't like to change. I know that. I deal with many of them. So to see from government introducing the restrictions on public auctions, I think it was a Wednesday, and agents transforming onto online platforms by the Saturday, I think that was amazing. And that's a credit to those agents that needed to move really quickly. We hear, and I think Bryce, the other day, somebody talked about, that we're going to see these, massive price reductions in the Victorian market. I just can't see that happening. The market's too strong. It was too strong at the start of COVID-19. What we will see is less transactions. And if COVID-19 was going to happen for us, it's happened at the right time in the property market, because we come into winter and we generally quieten down. So, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it will allow agents to make changes and continue to evolve and respect technology, but also allow them to re-establish the one-on-one communication that seems to have been lost, because we can send out a giant email blast, or we can send giant text messages and those sort of things. So I think from an investor point of view, absolutely, there's never a bad time to invest, and I think you just need to look at the moment to see what those opportunities are, providing that you can afford it in the current environment.
So Leah, I want to talk about how is the market holding up. Let's talk about the selling side first. So we do know that there's been significant volumes, reductions of listings and so forth. Have you got a rough percentage or number that you're seeing through the data coming through your site there? And you've got a great...
We haven't got a lot of data coming through at the minute. And one of the things that we are looking at is trying to, normally we'd see on the weekend, we'd expect, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 properties go to auction. We're just trying to work out, okay, we know those transactions are still happening, because I'm hearing, agent after agent saying we sold 3 properties last week. We sold 4 properties the week before. So we know transactions are still happening, but what we aren't able to just obtain at the moment is clear numbers. And I think that's probably going to take a little bit of time for us to rejig that. But absolutely, in my office where we sell, under 50 properties a year, we've made 2 sales in the last fortnight. So, again, very much that investor market.
So that's a good sign, and it's obviously why your opinion is, which is relatively similar to mine, that the correction that that the economists and everyone's talking about, isn't as panicked as what it is for the industry who are in the ground, in the field every day and seeing what's going on, as opposed to the media outlets who are looking for a headline and along those lines. So I appreciate you confirming that from what you're seeing and what you're hearing from the agents on the ground in Victoria. That's a positive sign for Melbourne.
Yeah.
On the tenancy side, this is obviously the biggest issue for most at the moment. Having 2,200 properties under management through your business, tell me what are the sort of 2 or 3 biggest challenges as a property manager that you're seeing out there, and how are you combating those to help your landlords and find the right balance between tenants and landlords?
Yeah. Look, I think at the moment is the fascination with regards to the rent relief and rent reductions during COVID-19. We saw the government's announcement, or the Premier's announcement yesterday, and my team would have received a dozen emails, and the subject line said rent relief package, what's available for me type thing. So at the moment we're just trying to work through how we create formulas for owners to be able to say, okay, well, has had a reduced income, which can be clearly demonstrated during COVID-19. This is what we're going to need to work with. So that's probably the main one. And challenges on the flip side, where owners who have lost their employment for a period of time, or we're hearing reports from a couple of my owners who've got a couple of properties where they're on a fixed mortgage and the banks just won't do anything with their package. So those owners have said, look, I'm really sorry, but we don't have any financial ability to move. We need that same amount of rent to come in order for us to comply with our own mortgage. One of the other areas that we're seeing some challenges in with regards to processing applications. So whilst we are still showing prospective tenants through properties and obtaining applications, we're not seeing that same level of applications coming through, but we're also not seeing the same number of tenants transacting either. So for us, on average, we would lease somewhere between 12 and 18 properties a week. Last week I think we did 4, so there are definitely some challenges there, and then that will flow through from cash flow, not only from the owner but also into individual businesses as well. So they're probably the biggest challenges at the minute.
So in terms of that movement or lack thereof because of our shutdown, phase 3, how are tenants trying to organise themselves to move around? Is still booking a removal truck and getting all of that sort of stuff organised still plausible and possible, or is there a little bit more friction in that process at the moment?
No, it all seems to be working still relatively smoothly with regards to removalists, the connection of utilities, the key collection process, the signing of documents. It's all happening as normal. It's just with that social distancing aspect and a lot more hygiene processes and practices in place. But overall, I know, and we've had this come through from the REIV, that the removalist companies are still operating, obviously at a reduced number of moves every week. But we will certainly still see tenants give notice to vacate because either their circumstances have changed or their decision for that particular property, it's no longer suitable and they decide to move on. So we're still seeing that happening.
And are you seeing any increases in the requests for terminating of lease from tenants?
No, not too many at the moment. We did notice, it's probably about 3 weeks ago, we were seeing a larger number of tenants give notice. And I think in 1 week we had about 18 come through. So that was high. We'd normally see somewhere between 10 and 12 a week. So to have 18 come through in only a couple of days, we were kind of sitting back thinking, okay, what is it going to look like for the investors in a month's time? Because what most agents have implemented in Victoria is that although a tenant would give their 28 days notice, we wouldn't show prospective tenants through until the property was vacant. So that's what most of us introduced almost immediately when when COVID-19 really started to come together. And so that then changes the marketing lead time. It changes it increases the client's anxiousness, I suppose, as well, because they're not getting any feedback from us on what the number of inquiries are, because there's no point in going live with the marketing when we can't show anyone in just yet. So,
and as the job seeker and job keeper, has that sort of put a bit of calmness back into the tenancy side, that they know that they're going to get some money coming through?
There definitely seems to be a calmness that has come through, but I think the other side of it is that we've seen some, communication from some tenants who, just don't want to apply to Centrelink or don't want to make their own inquiries, which is probably a little bit disappointing. So there's been a lot more pushback, probably more pushback than I would have anticipated from people who need to make inquiries in order to obtain some financial assistance. They seem to be quite reliant on the property manager telling them what they're entitled to, and property managers just won't know. They won't be across everything.
Okay. Yeah, the property managers have been putting in an impossible situation, really, aren't they? Because they're dealing with the tenant who's obviously showing some concern, and then they've got the landlord who's saying, well, I've also got some concern, and the poorer property managers having to make judgment calls that normally they wouldn't necessarily have to make. And my observation of the real estate professionals during this has been they've been agile and nimble, because if you think about how the real estate professionals work, for those people outside of the industry, they get paid on results. So they have to be nimble, they have to be agile, and they've had a few curveballs thrown at them of late. The fact that they can't have organised inspections, which largely in Victoria being the auction capital of Australia, that's put a big dent in them, and they've pivoted. And then it'd be worth, you and I chatted earlier in the week on radio, but it'd be worth getting your perspective on some of the anxiety that a lot of real estate professionals experienced over the Easter break. Because in Queensland, they got a nice little Easter Thursday announcement that gave them a bit of anxiety over the Easter break. But the Victorian body also, or the Victorian real estate professionals also received a little Easter gift that they weren't too appreciative of. Can you, for the benefit of the listeners, can you share what that was and some of the ramifications that you and I talked about earlier in the week around what that meant?
It certainly was an Easter gift. I won't forget Easter 2020, that's for sure. Particularly because my kids ate all my Easter eggs because I was on the phone so much, little rat bags. So we'd had a notification on the Wednesday that government were going to restrict or prohibit in private inspections in occupied properties, being whether it be a tenanted occupied property or a sales occupied property. And we were seeking clarification throughout the Wednesday and right up until basically 5 o'clock on the Thursday. So we worked out that even if that was the case, we would still be able to work within the social distancing rules, the hygiene processes, as all the agents had already been implementing. And we were working with the 1-on-2 rule, which meant that I could show a prospective purchaser through or a prospective tenant, and if 2 people were there from the one household, they could come along at the same time. So we'd sent out some correspondence to the members at about 5 o'clock on the Thursday, just letting everyone know this is what was happening. we'd also had reports that there were a reasonable number of businesses that were actually taking the 4-day long weekend, which was, that was encouraging. And I know my business, we do every year. So at about 5:35, we got an email back from the Minister's office saying that, no, this is the way it is. You can no longer complete inspections in occupied properties. So it did. It absolutely sent the real estate industry into a spin. Good Friday was spent either on the phone or, getting lobbying politicians and trying to get all the members across what was going on. So we did that all of the Friday. We had a lot of airtime, making sure everyone was aware of what was going on, because we were concerned coming into the Saturday that if this announcement wasn't clear for all practicing real estate agents, that they'd go out and show a prospective client through an occupied property, they could potentially be fined. So we wanted to make sure everyone was aware. So then Easter Sunday, we started to have some, direct conversations with the minister, and we ran through the practical aspects of how we could work with the legislation, but still needing to understand that we needed to show people through occupied properties. And for what most people don't realise, but the Victorian real estate industry contributes about 48% of the income to the state. So we're a big player for the state's income. We're big businesses with regards to how many people we employ. And then also the mental health aspect I was really, really concerned about, because we have so many people working from home, and for businesses to effectively be shut down the day before Easter was just crazy. So thankfully we're able to get a great resolution, which has been introduced. It came in on the Monday, and it allows so that the inspections of occupied, both tenanted and vendor-occupied properties, can still continue. Where there's been a slight tweak, I suppose, is now it's one-on-one. So even if I'm now showing somebody through and it's people from the same household, we can only take one person in at a time. And we have given the minister an undertaking that in the case of a tenanted property, if the tenant is very clear and says, I do not want any inspections taking place during COVID-19, we need to respect that position and have a conversation with that owner to decide about, perhaps different marketing ideas in relation to potentially selling that property, or looking at taking it off the market for a period of time.
Seems like common sense prevailed there too, didn't it, Leah? Because housing is an essential function, right? So you only have to go to Woolworths or Coles or whatever supermarket you go to realise that there's more people in that space that are going about their business. So it kind of just made sense, but it really did throw, as you said, through a tailspin. And some of the scenarios, and you'll have more than me to share, but some of the scenarios were someone who sold previous, who were then in a situation where they needed to buy, were all of a sudden in a situation where they realistically would have had only an option to buy sight unseen from potentially a walkthrough video from the real estate agent, which no one who's spending any significant amount of money wants to do. So it just opened up a can of worms of scenarios. You might want to share some of the scenarios that you guys probably tossed around all weekend.
Exactly. And, for people that financially needed to sell for whatever reason was going on, that they wouldn't be able to sell. And you're right, with all the technology that we have available, people don't buy property without physically seeing it. They need to. It's just the way the industry operates, and I'm pretty sure that would be the census across most of the states in the country. What it might have done is put tremendous pressure on the rental market, because if people who had sold and had 30, 60, 90 days to move out, then they would need to be looking at a vacant property in order to transfer themselves into that property. When we've got a rental vacancy rate that's sitting at 2.3%, and anything under 3% is really deemed critical, that whole spin was also going to be enormous. The ramifications just continued in all the different directions.
Well, we just we spoke earlier today with Antonia Mercarella up in Queensland, and she was equally hopeful of a reverse decision to sort of mirror the Victorian.
Well, Leah, what I do like about that, Leah, just you talk about 48%. This is just highlights from our point of view when we wear our property investors hats. I have, my data suggests that we have about $7.5 billion in state stamp duties each year, and then our land tax is around 3.7 billion in Victoria. So we're contributing around $11.2 billion to the economy. Some of that money is obviously then being handed over to the tenancy associations because they're government funded. So that's great that they've got the resources and support there. But there's very little for the asset owner, the property owner, in terms of the resources or any sort of money going to associations supporting that. So I do have a little bit of a beef about that. But in terms of, the overall point is that property owners, property investors do pay our way, don't we? I mean, we contribute significantly to that, and obviously the mum and dad investor who's working with property managers like yourself are allowed us to be able to help employ you, and the tenant the same thing, and the investment that mum and dad's make in providing all this essential shelter and housing. I mean, it just works really, really well in regards when it's all up and running beautifully. And then we have black swan events like these, which really put some stress around the edges. But in most cases, property investors and tenants have a great relationship, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the last check, we have about 19 taxes in the state of Victoria that the property investor pays. It's a lot.
It is a lot. But I mean, I don't think the media understand that, and I don't think sometimes the general public gets to understand that. A hardship story makes for good media, doesn't it? In terms of that, and they're happening on both sides of the fence. There's no doubt that there are people that have been significantly impacted by this, and our thoughts go out to them in terms of dealing with their financial and mental issues during this challenging time for them. But the vast majority of people do a good job. They play by the rules, but we tend to regulate for the lowest common denominators, who are the 3% or 5% who sometimes can be the most vocal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leah, have you had a chance to digest the rent relief package that the Andrews government announced yesterday? And clearly, it's less than 24 hours. But have you got any? If you have had a chance, great. But if not, have you got any early observations of what you saw yesterday?
Look, we're still pulling it apart. We spoke with the Minister's office yesterday, and we're still getting some further clarification. And, again, one of the advantages of being a property manager is I can look at a scenario like that and then pull apart and say, okay, you've announced this, but what are the practical aspects and how do we move with it? So I think one example is that a tenant can vacate due to hardship if they're in a lease. And that sounds good and easy to comprehend, but what sort of time frame is there? Are there any potential consequences financially? Is it an immediate notice? Is it 28 days? So there's those sort of things that we'll continue to work through. And there's a lot that's missing from it. We're trying to work out some formula. So the Premier announced that rental stress sits at anything over 30% of the contribution from the rental payment out of the income. So we'll be working with some formulas to assist property managers to be able to say, okay, let's look at your income that was prior to COVID-19, let's look at your income that is now COVID-19, and then let's look what rent you're paying, and let's do the calculations to see, are you contributing, or is your rent sitting above or below that 30%. And I think once we can clearly demonstrate those formulas for property managers and the processes to take, the negotiations around rent reductions will be a lot easier. Whereas at the moment, we're seeing requests like, I'm in hardship, tell me what the owner's going to give me, or I want a month's free rent this month, or I'm just happy to take a 10% reduction. Probably my favourite, which is really disappointing, is I'm not in any financial hardship, but my neighbour's getting a rent reduction, so can I have one too? It's just
not in the spirit, is it? Unfortunately,
no. And it's disappointing. But we do know that there are reasons for evictions, which again wasn't really clear with the Premier's announcement. So there's a lot of misunderstanding that there is a moratorium on no evictions, but that doesn't mean that an owner can't still sell their property and ask the tenant to vacate. So we're getting some better clarity on that, but I do know that sits at about 10 or 12 reasons that you can still end a tenancy during COVID-19, and once we've got that clear and in writing, we will be able to share that with everyone as well.
That's a good point you raised, because I was going to ask you a related question to that, because we've got this moratorium on evictions, but there are circumstances where people are poorly treating the properties, or outside of being affected by COVID, or they're just being a terrible, suburban citizen. And so I was going to ask you if there are circumstances where, because there's a moratorium on evictions for people who have been adversely affected by COVID-19, but there's not a moratorium on not paying rent. So clearly you've got to stay there. But because part of the rent relief package is around land tax concessions, and so what I was hoping to get some insights from you, even if it's just speculation that you can't confirm yet, is if with the Andrews government giving those incentives around land tax, for example. Does that have to be a rent reduction that has gone away, or can that be a rent deferment? Because if it's a reduction that's gone away, well, then that has ramifications for landlords' protection insurance, which I'd like your comments on it also.
So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the rent reduction versus a deferred payment, and deferred payments are probably probably happening more in the commercial space than they are in the residential. But that being said, I saw a client just yesterday say, look, I'm happy to allow the tenant not to pay this month's rent, and we'll put a payment plan in place for that tenant to be able to bring those payments back up to date over the next 4 months. So there's lots of different ways of doing things. Absolutely. It's really important that just because there is technically no eviction process in place, it doesn't mean that you stop paying the rent. And in fact, I think the wording on one of the reasons is around you can't willfully and with intent not pay your rent, which we're seeing around. There's been communication that you guys may have seen about the rent strike, the petitions that a lot of council areas have put together a petition to say, we form part of this 1,200 group and we're not paying our rent. So those provisions that need to be implemented into the regulation, so that you can't just stop paying your rent, because there is a flow-on effect that goes on for an extended period of time, which we just can't tolerate. But
could you imagine all of the landlord property owners in that particular municipality basically saying, that's fine, we own 30% of the property in this area and we're not going to pay our rates? How do you feel about that, local councils?
That's right.
Again, it's opportunistic. It's not getting to basically the symptoms. Should be treating the symptoms, and the cause. The cause is in some cases bad money management. In other cases, it's out of their control. But I just want to clarify one thing, Leah, if you do know the answer to this. Under this new package, does this then create a mandatory discussion between the tenant and the landlord if they can demonstrate that 30% reduction?
Yes. So the process, from what we understand, it will be, you need to show your income based on prior to COVID-19 and COVID-19. If the income, or if the rent is now greater than 30% of what they were contributing, then they would be entitled to make an application, for want of a better word, to Consumer Affairs, and both landlord and tenant can make that application. So particularly where you've got a stalemate and the tenant's no longer communicating, so it's really important that the landlord, or it won't be the landlord, it'll be the property manager, does it. And then that mediation will take place. If if the rent contribution is greater than 30% of the person's reduced income during COVID-19, then the government will assist by offering a further payment of $2,000.
That's out of that $80 million that they've set
which is
aside.
out of the 80 million, which we understand will come back through via Director of Housing and Human Services.
Yep.
And it will be then paid into the real estate agent's bank account.
Excellent.
And that will show support, but there's provisions on that. So you have to earn less than $100,000 and you have to have less than $5,000 in your bank account. So I think what the Premier is also pushing along, that if you have savings and you can use it, then you need to consider using it for this short period of time.
And I think that is, of all of the states and territories and me reviewing all this, that is the most sensible thing to do, right? In terms of, it's all well and good to say you've lost your job, but what if you've got $100,000 sitting in a bank account, right? So, okay, you're expecting the landlord to cover the rent because you don't want to dip into your savings. So I'd like to see the other states and territories follow that lead in terms of that $5,000 buffer. And so my next logical question is, how do we prove that? I mean, what is the tenant going to withhold information about the separate bank account, the ING account that they've got, and just show their day-to-day banking account?
Yeah,
you know.
And that's the information that we're trying to create a table of documentation requests that a property manager can review.
Excellent.
It shouldn't be, I had this argument with somebody yesterday. The suggestion was, well, now it's an invasion of privacy. Well, I don't believe it is, because if you flip it around, if that person was applying for the property, we would need to go through and demonstrate to the owner that this person could financially afford the property. So it's just this in reverse. We're just doing it backwards when you've got a tenant in place. That's all. And it's not that the property manager is going to go and share the information with anyone. It's about making sure that we're getting true and accurate information so that the owner can make an educated decision on the proposed rent reduction if one's necessary.
Now, would they have to sign a declaration like a stat dec for that? Because as I'm saying to you, there will be some gamification going on here where people don't fully disclose. That is my biggest fear, that a savings account is separate to the transactional account, so they'll only show their transactional account. So would there be any recourse on the tenant? Because as soon as a tenant says to me, for privacy reasons, I'm not willing to disclose that, then that is a complete, absolute full disclosure to me that they've got savings, and that's why they're trying to bucket push back on it. So if anyone is sort of saying, look, for privacy reasons, I'm not willing to disclose that, well, then obviously the landlord can take an assessment of that to sort of say, well, I suspect you probably have enough sufficient funds, nothing to see here, I'm not going to reduce the rent.
Yeah, that's right. And then that would flow on to the conversation if it went through to the compulsory mediation to say, well, we've reviewed these documents, we can see that there's absolutely been a reduction in the income that's come through prior to COVID-19. However, when we asked the question with regards to, savings or, how would you financially support yourself in different circumstances, and it wasn't COVID-19, then we weren't able to get any, true result. And the same applies for households. So this is one of the other parts that we're just trying to work out from a practitioner's point of view, from a household. So if it's with myself and my husband and I lose my income, my role for 6 months, but my husband doesn't, then therefore the assessment should be on the household income. And that makes sense, because you would go, okay, well, they've got combined account. But what about if, say, the three of us live together, we're not, connected in any way, we pay individually, and I lose my income? We know that tenants, lease agreements in Victoria are joint and severally. So does that mean that all three of us are responsible to make up that extra payment, or should I just get the rent reduction? So there's that practical element that we just have to work through.
Yeah, I think New South Wales have gone for the collection of the household, whether they are just flatmates. That needs to be overall because of that the joint and several liability in the contract.
Yeah.
Leah, if you had the opportunity to pitch to the Premier's office regarding things that you think would be fair for all parties to be included in the rent relief package, what would you pitch?
Oh, gee. I know one thing after the last month, I certainly would never consider going into politics, that's for sure. Do you know, I think self-funded retirees have missed out here, and I don't know what the answer is, but that's certainly been highlighted from a number of clients of mine where they don't have a mortgage on the property, they don't take income from the government, and the rent supports them on a daily basis. So yeah, and if they only own one property, or even if they own two and they don't fall under the threshold of the the land tax exemptions, so they might not actually even pay land tax, then they're not going to get anything.
I think you make a really good point there. They're not even going to get the $750 two lots bonuses, no. Right? Because and yet, what have they done? They've worked really, really hard to not be a burden on the government. They pay tax on the rent that they're getting on the property, so they're contributing. They're providing shelter. They're doing everything, and not a brass razoo for them.
Yeah.
You know, so which, you know, if you want to have an aspirational society, they are your self-funded retirees. They are the people that everyone should be looking at and saying, "Good on you, well done you. Look at you go." And potentially, you know, they could be impacted by tenants not paying the rent, and they've got no recourse or no fallback, which is really, you know, disappointing. And we talk, because we're talking about really the 4% of tenants who really are doing it hard, who have true hardship, not the majority of them. Everyone's just potentially being opportunistic. And they're probably the 4% of self-funded who's are also saying, "Yep, we get kicked in the guts as well," in terms of no support.
Yeah.
Well, Leah, it's we certainly appreciate that it's been a busy time for you since you took the seat as the president there of the REIV. We certainly appreciate that you've taken the time to share your thoughts with us here on the Property Couch. I know that before we chatted, we talked about the fact that our audience is a broad cross-section of property folks who are hungry for property information, but you had a message that for all of the real estate agents who are listening to our podcast, that they should well and truly make sure that they are REIV members so that they can get the most up-to-date information. So you're encouraging them, if they're not members, to become members so that they can make sure that they're informed during a time when lots of people are socially distancing and not being as connected as they could be. So we'd certainly encourage that message to all the real estate agents that are listening. But again, we appreciate your time. It was enjoyable chatting with you, as I said before, on ABC Radio earlier in the week. Thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts with our audience on the podcast this week. And
would love to get you back to talk about the reforms as well that are coming through the industry here in Victoria later in
my
the
next
year.
battle.
we didn't get a lot of a chance to chat about that, but we figured we'd walk before we crawl before we walk. But
only 130 changes coming in 1 July. Not much.
Yeah.
As Ben said, we'll circle back to that. But thanks again for coming on to the Property Couch.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks.
All right, Ben. Interesting times. Interesting feedback where Leah was happy that she wasn't necessarily in Queensland right now with her Queensland counterparts.
Yeah, look, so Bryce, I mean, my takeaways from that are clear. There's still a little bit of detail that needs to come from the announcement that was released yesterday, and we're going to obviously see Leah and the team at the REIV and also, you know, us at Picker and all that, putting all that together and sharing that information out there. So it was really great of her to come on with the information that she had to hand. As I said, most of this is developing by the day. So we really greatly appreciate the work that she does, and obviously, the great work that the REIV does in terms of the professionalism of the industry down here in Victoria.
Yeah, and a shout out to all the real estate professionals that were operating in Victoria over the last week, Ben, who all had mild stress related anxiety over the weekend regarding the potential change that was going to happen. Common heads prevailed, as Leah spoke about then, Ben. So which was a relief for everyone. Real estate professionals, homeowners, potential renters, investors, everyone would have been affected by that, and it would have been a very nasty fallout for everyone, Ben. So, hey, my life hack today comes from Brendan Vaughan, who's one of our advisors. I put a shout out and I said, what's everyone's life hack, Ben, when it comes to isolation? And this is what Brendan said. Some people who work from home get up and get ready as if going into the office, including the suit or the school uniform for the kids. Yep, Ben, you're doing that. I know you're pointing over there. And my kids this morning, first day of school, Ben, they put their school T-shirts on just to get them in the right state, because James's state is everything. So it says, including what you wear, then you go for a walk outside in the fresh air and listen to their favourite podcast, and then come back to the inverted commas, Ben, office, ready for their work day. It's all about maintaining the mindset and routine around their work/school day, which I thought was really, really good advice. And just a reminder to folks who are navigating for the first time, to potentially two people who are working from home, including looking after children, navigating their online learning. It is a very, very stressful time. So it's important that we remember some of these life hacks. Ben, did you know?
Did you know, Bryce? Well, I thought on the back of obviously these announcements, it's really important that we understand, what type of relief we're getting here in Victoria and also New South Wales announcements. So I just did a bit of investigation on the land tax that's being payable, Bryce. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the land tax levels that are being paid, and then effectively a landlord may be able to get access to 25% of that money in the relief. And then
sounds good on paper, Ben.
What would that constitute as a weekly relief that you could pass on to the tenant? Okay, because we all know, I mentioned it a little bit earlier about the amount of money that here I go, hashtag property investors pay their way. We'll see if we can get that trending. Property investors pay their way. So here we go. In Victoria, they always talk about the land threshold at the moment. It's 250,000. No, it's not. It's actually $249,999, because if it's 250, that's when you hit your first threshold, and that's $275. So $275 is the land tax that you would have to pay if your land value on the investment property or the property that's not your principal place of residence, $275 a year. So if you get 25% relief on that, that's $69. Now, if you had to support a tenant for over a 6-month period, you've got a whopping $2.86 to dish out as rental relief for your tenant. Moving
not
right
a good
along,
starting point, Ben. I wouldn't have thought.
Not a good starting point.
I can offer you $2.86.
$500,000 price. So land tax payable in the state of Victoria during 2020 is $775 price. So 25% is $194 price. So you could slash out on $8.07 per week if you wanted to extend that over a 6-month period.
Yeah, still don't think it's a good starting point.
Nope. 750,000 land valuation. So remember, not the improvements, just the land value. You've got land tax payable of $1,725 price. That gives you the potential of rebating to you $431 if you were to provide rental relief for a tenant. That's a whopping $17.97 per week over a 6-month period. $1 million price.
This is land value too, not property
land value. Correct. $2,975, which 25% is $744, which would be $30 a week, or $30.99, rounding up $31. 1,250,000 land value. Your land tax bill payable is $4,975 per annum. That would give you $1,244 for the 25% relief that you would be able to get, which is $51.82 that you may be able to pass on to your tenant. 1.5 million, rounding it out, Bryce. Land tax is $6,975. 25% of that is $1,744, which is $72.66 a week. Of course, we're not saying that you would give relief over a 6-month period. You may do that over a 3-week period, or you might just sort of say, look, the relief I'm getting, by way of example, is $431. So I will forego that $431 for my tenant as a means by we're all in this together. And that was based on a $750,000 land value. Now, the challenge we've got here, Bryce, is that a significant amount of investors who own rental properties, i.e. units, don't actually pay land tax.
No, they don't.
So it's not capturing a big number, and which is a nice little segue, because I don't know what that number is in Victoria. I've been trying to get it, but I haven't been able to. But I do know what that number is in New South Wales, Bryce. It's only 16% of people in New South Wales are paying land tax, and that represents 84% of people, i.e. property owners, are not getting or paying land tax, because the threshold in New South Wales, Bryce, is $734,000. Right? So at $735,000 land value, your tax payable is $116. 25% of that is obviously $29. You don't have a lot to pass on as possible savings to a tenant. At $800,000, it kicks up pretty quickly in New South Wales, $1,156, which 25% of that equates to $289 that you would maybe be able to help your tenant out with. $1 million land valuation in New South Wales, $4,356, which means you've got $1,089 for 25% that you may be able to support your tenant with. And we would encourage that if you are in a position to do so. And finally, rounding out New South Wales, $1.5 million land value. Land tax is $12,356. So you've got $3,089 that might be able to help out that tenant, and the government can pick up the bill for that. But interesting, $1.5 million valuation in Victoria for land versus $1.5 million valuation in New South Wales. $6,975 land tax payable in Vic, $12,356. So double. So I just thought it's important that people knew just how far that money's going to stretch for the landlord to be able to pass on to the tenant. So I did the numbers in New South Wales. It represented the $220 million they've set aside for New South Wales represents about 10% of the land tax revenues that they receive per annum, not the stamp duty. That's in the I think it's almost approaching $10 billion that New South Wales state government gets in New South Wales. And in Victoria, I mentioned it earlier, so New South Wales land tax revenues are around $4.538 billion based on 2019, 2020 state revenue government budgets. And then, I mentioned it before, Victorian stamp duty around $7.5 billion. Queensland stamp duty is around $5 billion. So it'd be nice to get a little bit more to help out the old landlord who can then help out their tenant during this COVID-19 period. Bryce, there you go.
Good look under the bonnet. Ben reinforces a couple of points that we talked about throughout our 5-year history on this podcast. One is you should consider borderless investing, because obviously there's opportunities to navigate through the land tax system. And number two, it just further reinforces that we are not one big market. We are sub-markets within just by borders, and then we are sub-markets within those borders as well. So interesting, Ben. Thanks for looking under the bonnet on that. I think that might be insightful for a lot of folks who are trying to digest some of the relief that's on offer around the rent relief packages for various state governments. So there you go, folks. Hopefully that was another episode that just kept you informed during these challenging times, so that you can make better decisions around the facts rather than the noise. And we certainly hope that that has helped, particularly for those folks that are in Victoria, living in a house in Victoria, investing in Victoria, and have impacts from anything that does happen in Victoria. As we talked about in the interview, we will circle back to Leah at some stage to dive a little further on not only the rent relief package, but also some of the RTA changes, the 130 changes that are happening later on in the year. So, Ben, until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, folks.
Hey there folks, Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listened to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.